Radio.
Hi, this is your host, Dr. B. Mayfield, and today we have the topic of back to school for the mature student, those who are reentering the workforce and are trying to update their skills and are trying to better enhance their ability to transition to another career. It's an enormous opportunity, but it also has a presentation of a number of very discrete challenges that face learners that are going back into the workforce and are reentering the school arena. We're so excited today to have as our guest Phil Trejo. Phil Trejo is an experienced educator with over 20 years experience in his field. He has worked as a special education coordinator. He is a nationwide presenter who has specific expertise in the area of academic resiliency, and he's here today to talk to us about how to overcome many of the challenges that you might face coming back within the academic arena. Welcome, Phil.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it, Dr. Mayfield.
Well, Phil, how did you get interested in academic resiliency?
Well, I think when I look back on how I got really interested in it, I think it was because I really resembled a lot of those students that I was reading about, whether it was articles and publications, when I got into education. And it's just, when we talk about those under-resourced learners or when we talk about the achievement gap, I was just like, wow, that's me. That's who I was. And so just really became really interested in that, and especially since I decided to go the career path of education. Well, how can I make a bigger difference? How could I be more effective in preparing students for success in school and beyond school? And I think it was just really, one of the biggest things that got me hooked was, I believe it was back in the 70s, I came across this article, and it was about the Rosenthal Effect. And
what is that?
Well, basically, it's been called a lot of different things. It's the Rosenthal Effect or Pygmalion theory, but or self-fulfilling prophecy. But what was interesting about this Dr. Rosenthal is that he did a particular study that was pretty famous. He randomly selected this group of students, and then he randomly picked a teacher and assigned this teacher to those students. But what he did is he told the teacher that, hey, all of these students that you were selecting, you're such a great teacher that we're going to reward you. And so all of these students that you've been given this year are highly gifted and talented students. And the truth was, none of them were. I mean, they were just randomly selected. So that teacher had just a random sampling of students. But it was that belief that, so these students are highly gifted, talented, they're going to be high-achieving students. Long story short, at the end of that school year, all of these students tested gifted and talented. They had incredible amount of growth. And, the teacher thought, wow, well, these were just really great kids to work with. And the teacher thought, wow, I must be the stellar teacher. And, at the end of the study, it was like, well, you were picked out of a hat and so were the kids. And it just goes to demonstrate how powerful our thought processes, our belief system, our internal scripts, however you want to word it, just how powerful that is and how much that plays a role in whether we're talking about success in school, talking about success in the workplace. So that really, I think, really started me on that topic.
Well, that is a fascinating study, because I think we don't even fully realize how significant our thoughts can impact our actions, and how those can impact our ability to be able to move in the direction that we'd like to. And I think that mature students who are going back into the educational arena face specific kinds of challenges. Would you speak to some of those?
And it's funny, we talk about the mature student, and we've always, especially in post-secondary education, higher ed, we talk about those as the non-traditional student. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that currently, and especially in most community college, those so-called non-traditional students, the older students, mm-hmm. actually is the majority anymore in a lot of colleges. But when we talk about probably the first challenge I think of when I've worked with these students is how we're wired. Part of that is our brain is wired with a negative bias. And so what that means is it tries to keep us safe from perceived threats. And there's been a lot of research on it. The ratio is, they say it's about a 3-to-1 negative to positive bias ratio. And so the point is that it's a new setting. It's unfamiliar. We don't feel comfortable with it. We're not sure about how is it supposed to work out. Am I going to be real successful? I may not have the highest confident level. So the very first threat challenge is ourself. It's that, wow, I was never really a good student in math, or I never really thought I was college material. And that's probably the first challenge, because when we experience a roadblock or a challenge, an obstacle, which we always will, then we view things from that filter, and that, wow, you know what? I told myself I'm not college material. See, this isn't coming easy. I don't know if I can do it. So that first challenge is really our own belief system.
Well, that's pretty significant. What are some other things that you think might impede a mature student being successful?
Okay, with our non-traditional students, what's been their past experience that they had in school? Maybe they didn't really care for school, didn't do too well in it. They kind of survived the school experience rather than thrived in it, and thus they ended up a bit, underprepared, under-resourced for it. Going to post-secondary education, if you think about it, that wasn't their first choice, because obviously they committed to something else. You know what? When they graduated high school, they decided, you know what? That's not for me. I'm going to go into the workforce, and for whatever reason, they weren't as successful as they hoped they would be, or the job market changed, and so it wasn't what they naturally gravitated to. So it's they have tends to be a high level of anxiety that a lot of people experience.
Well, I can certainly understand that. Anything else you want to speak to in terms of things that might impede mature students?
Absolutely. It's life happens. At this point in their life, they've made that commitment. Okay, I'm thinking about going to school to better myself, or I'm thinking about getting into a different career field, maybe moving from a typical blue collar to more of a white collar position, or whatever the change. That's a big change to have happen in your life. And then on top of it, at that point in your life, you're probably got a lot of your tentacles are stretched out into a lot of different areas. You may or may not have a family. You may or may not have kids that you have to take care of. And so there usually tends to be a lot more that an older, non-traditional student has to juggle than your typical kid that followed that path of graduated high school. Now I'm going to college. You know what? The adults got children, may still have to work a full-time job. So it's kind of life is happening, and there's more balls to juggle.
Well, I can certainly understand all of those challenges. I have to tell you that I pursued a graduate program while I was an adult learner, and I wanted to upgrade my skills. Personally, I found that the school and life responsibilities were particularly challenging for me around that time commitment. How do I balance the time with my family and the time that I had to commit to the schoolwork? I think I also found the challenge to be accessing the classes I needed that would coincide with my schedule. Since I was working during the day, my schedules had to be my classes had to be in the evening, so I could not always get the classes I wanted at the time that I needed. And that type of conflict was especially challenging for me. And I think finally just managing the cost. The cost seems to be a significant factor for me because along with the expenses that I had for my family, I had to determine how I was going to increase my expenses with the cost of education and tuition. I would imagine that those are probably pretty familiar challenges that many mature learners have. Do you find that?
No, absolutely, Vernita. Those are really great examples of some additional balls to juggle. The cost of continuing education is definitely increasing. It's not decreasing, and you're absolutely right. I mean, some of us, in higher learning, you know what, we're not the best at what you might call academic customer service, and there's not a high degree of flexibility, and sometimes we're making people choose between their job and being able to finish out their program because of lack of flexibility from the institution's part on when they're offering the courses. So that's a great point.
Absolutely. In fact, I find that even in the workplace that their supervisor or your supervisor may not necessarily be supportive of you going back to school. And as odd as that may seem, I remember having to struggle with taking my very last course for one graduate course. And so I went to my supervisor. I explained to them that one day a week I would have to miss an evening staff meeting so that I could take my very last course to complete my graduate course, and my supervisor looked at me and said, absolutely not. You will be here for this staff meeting every Monday afternoon regardless. And so that was especially challenging for me because I then had to be late to class every week so that I could accommodate my supervisor. So I think that's a conundrum that many workers may face, is that the supervisor or the organization in which they're working may not even support them increasing their education or trying to upgrade their skills. As crazy as that might seem, at least it did to me at the time. Have you seen any of that?
Oh, absolutely. I've seen it a ton, and it's not that out of the ordinary, because part of it is your current employer may see it as, okay, this is part of that writing on the wall that you've outgrown, that position, that company, and so not necessarily supportive because they don't see you once you've attained that additional education, you've obtained that goal. You're going to be a short timer, and so sometimes there's those obstacles, and so at times we have to be selective about who we choose to share our goals with, and sometimes expecting our employer to be supportive of that pursuit. It's just not going to happen because they kind of want you where you're at.
Well, the great news is that I made it through at least 2 graduate programs as a mature learner. I know that you've also been a mature student, so we know that there's some skills and tips that you're going to share with us on the ways that anyone who wants to return to the education arena to increase their skills and shift jobs or careers if they need to, they can do that, and they can do that successfully. I'm looking forward to our continued conversation around the mature learner and academic resiliency. We'll be back in a moment with Phil Trejo.
A Kind Voice is a call-in line that lives upstream from depression hotlines. You don't need to be experiencing a crisis to call us. Our volunteers take calls on a book you read, a movie or game you saw, or just about anything you'd like to discuss. Call 800-876-2399 to speak with a Kind Voice. Our volunteers aren't professional counselors. They're kind voices who are here for you. Call 800-876-2399 or visit us at akindvoice.org.
Here are some snippets of some of the other wonderful programs you'll hear on A Kind Voice Radio.
Good evening. Welcome again to this week's episode of A Kind Voice Radio. You are listening to The Good News Show. I'm your host, Dean Buchanan. This is A Kind Voice on Good News, where all news is good news all of the time. No negative news here.
A biography or a long mystery, a picture book filled with history. Was it a fiction book or one that helps you to cook? Call us now, we'll talk about your book.
Good evening, and welcome to A Kind Voice on Books. I'm your host, Eden Blackwell. I would just like to share some facts about libraries and the great service they provide. They're such a vital part of our communities.
Call us now, let's talk about your book.
Welcome to another episode of A Kind Voice on Movies. I'm your host for the evening, Zenobia Elise. We've got an exciting program planned for you tonight. So with that being said, let's go to the movies.
Let's talk sports on the radio. Let's talk sports on the radio. Baseball or football, any kind of sports will do. Let's talk sports on the Kind Voice Radio.
And good evening, everyone, and welcome to A Kind Voice on Sports. This is your host, Demetrius Means. And, folks, I've got a good show for you this evening.
Good evening. This is Dr. V.M. Mayfield, and I'm delighted to welcome you to A Kind Voice on Employment, Opportunity, and Innovation. Tonight, our topic is the game changers, or how individuals are transforming lives as part of their business.
I'm Pete Kramer here with my good friend Bruce Gramwell, and in case anybody doesn't know that, the bumps that you hear on the way into the program are written and performed by Bruce. And if you want to hear some more excellent music from that gentleman, go to reverbnation.com/Bruce Gramwell, that's Graml, and here's some pretty cool tunes.
A Kind Voice Radio.
Hi, this is Dr. V. Mayfield with A Kind Voice on Employment, Opportunity, and Innovation. We're talking today with Phil Trejo, whose educational career has demonstrated a passion for improving the success of underperforming student groups by focusing on the variables that students and educators can influence. We've been talking about the mature student returning back to the educational arena to increase their skills and some of the challenges that lie in this particular circumstance. What we are about to learn is about academic resiliency, something I guess that Phil will explain in a little bit more depth that can help any individual to be more successful as they begin to pursue this type of endeavor. So I'm going to turn again to Phil, and Phil, could you just give us a little bit more information about what is this thing, academic resiliency? What is that all about?
Okay. First, I'm going to start off with a little bit of information prior to that. Back in the 50s, about mid-50s, there came out with this information in the studies, and they called it locus of control. And they were talking about internal locus of control and external locus of control. And so that internal locus of control is that, in a nutshell, that I can influence factors in my pursuit or my journey of obtaining some kind of goal. And an external locus of control is, you know what, it's already in the cards, it's destiny, if it's meant to be, it will happen, that kind of mindset. And as the field of psychology has gone on, and then they started to really study resiliency. And you know, it's an individual's tendency to be able to cope with stress and adversity. And it's how do people develop positive behavioral adaptations to the adversity, trauma, the stresses in their life. And if you look at, let's say, the topic of resiliency as kind of this tree trunk, then academic resiliency would be one of those big branches. Because when it comes to resiliency, it's not a universal construct that applies to all aspects of my life. It doesn't work that way. I may be resilient to certain specific factors or situations, and yet be quite vulnerable in others. And so when we talk about, let me give a great example. We've all heard that stereotype of a person who is street smart. So, Dr. Mayfield, what's your definition of say someone who's street smart?
Well, I would say that's someone who can, I don't know, that's a really good question. I guess someone who can really sort of navigate many of life's challenges in general. Someone who has not necessarily academic learning, but they have a sort of worldly knowledge or understanding about how things work in the world.
Okay, that was absolutely perfect. That's on the money. Now, how would, and again, these are kind of stereotypes, but all right, now, what's the definition of someone who is book smart?
Well, I would say that someone who has probably been very successful in their studies and their learning classes and school and the traditional sense of learning.
No, that's absolutely perfect. So, someone book smart, they've been able to succeed in an academic setting. Well, what we're talking about when we talk about academic resiliency is there are some specific things that we know make up someone who is going to be highly resilient in academic areas. And since we know that, then that really helps us to pinpoint. That's what we want. We want ultimately, someone coming back to school. And it doesn't matter if we're talking traditional or non-traditional student, we want that person to be successful. So academic success is those supports that we can provide that are going to yield us the most positive effect for someone in an academic setting. And when you talk about non-traditional students, and again in general, pursuing some kind of post-secondary education wasn't my first choice. You know what? That really turns out to be a really powerful tool to increase student success. And this is a huge factor, especially when we talk about in the community colleges, the percentage of people that are caught up in having to complete some type of remedial course. We're usually talking a math course, or we're talking an English, a language art course. It's surpassing nationally. It's past 50% of those non-traditional students are going to get caught up in at least one or more of those remediation courses. And the thing that's really scary about that is those students that are caught up in those courses, less than 25% of them end up getting their certificate or getting their associate's degree. So not a high level of success.
That sounds pretty bleak. So I'm ready now to hear some of those strategies that our listeners can really adhere to when they begin to embark upon this kind of endeavor. What would you say is the most important strategy that they can do in order to achieve that success?
If I had to narrow it down to what might be the single most important would be.
Let me shift that a little bit. I guess where I'd like to go is maybe to prioritize the list of things that are important, maybe starting with the most important. So, and so in descending order, sort of some of the most important things that someone could do to begin to be successful.
One of those things is Jack Canfield wrote this book, The Success Principles. And I thought, and I read that book, and one of the most powerful things that came out of that book was this one little sentence, and I think it made such a difference, and I use it all the time, and that's that E plus R equals O. And what that means is event plus your response equals the outcome. And so it's all about how you choose to respond. And if you buy into that, then that really empowers the person. That, they take personal responsibility, and they see themselves as the primary cause of the outcomes and their experiences. So if they don't like it, okay, so what are the actions that you need to take to change that kind of, to change the result? Rather than a lot of times we see ourselves as a victim. You know what? I didn't do well in that course because that teacher didn't like me, or because, that's given everybody else the power. So I think the one of the most important things is to take that personal responsibility, that you have the power to determine the outcome. So that's one of the first ones.
Okay, that's a great start. We're going to be looking forward to hearing the rest of the strategies and tips you have for ensuring that the mature student can be successful in a post-secondary setting. We'll be back in 2 minutes to continue our discussion with Phil Trejo.
Hi, this is Bruce Grammel. I wrote my song, The Alchemy of Kindness, after I became familiar with the organization called A Kind Voice. A Kind Voice is a community of volunteers that provide the opportunity for conversation on a variety of topics. The title is one of their slogans, and the phrase really hits home with me. I hope that you'll enjoy my song, and whether you may be a caller or a future volunteer, I hope you'll take the time to find out more about the wonderful folks at A Kind Voice.
The alchemy of kindness is one that we believe. When we reach out to each other, you know we both receive. We're always here for you. We're right beside the phone. When kind voices come together, it seems we're never alone. So if you're reaching out, you know we're reaching too. Pick up the phone, that's all you have to do. Call us now if you need a kind voice. If you need a kind voice. If you got some good news you heard the other day. Maybe you read a good book you finished yesterday. How was that new movie you finally went to see? Is your favorite sports team as good as they should be? If you're feeling down and lonely, a friendly voice is just a call away. Call us now if you need a kind voice. If you need a kind voice. That new class you picked is harder than you thought. You got a good deal on the new car you bought. Your family's not home and your friends are away. Your daughter just called, your grandson took his first steps today. Sometimes we just need someone to talk to. You know we all need someone who listens well. Call us now if you need a kind voice. When you want a kind voice. When you need a kind voice. When you want a kind voice. Call us now if you need a kind voice. A Kind Voice Radio.
Hi, this is Dr. V. Mayfield, and welcome back to A Kind Voice on Employment, Opportunity, and Innovation. We're talking with Phil Trejo, whose educational career has covered the K-16 spectrum of education, ranging from a special education teacher, principal, and director of teaching excellence and academic leadership at the community college level, and most recently has taken on the role of a K-12 superintendent in Pritchett, Colorado, a small rural district in southeastern Colorado. In any case, we have been talking about some of the factors that might help support a mature learner going back to school, and what are some things that they can do to ensure they will be successful within this environment. Phil, you have just talked about having the right mindset and taking personal responsibility for your actions and your outcomes as one of the most important things that a mature learner might take on. I just have one quick question about that because I think that might be a little difficult. So we can take this down to a very concrete level. What are some ways or some things that I might do in order to take on that personal responsibility and change my mindset? For example, we talked about earlier in the program that someone's past experience really has a way of influencing how they approach school. For example, I had just a horrible time in high school, and the last thing I remember is the teachers really hated me, and I was really unsuccessful with my writing or my reading. How do I increase my sense of efficacy about being successful at that by merely enrolling in the classes? I mean, sometimes I can't even get to that point, or I may not be able to get to the point where I feel comfortable enough to enroll in a post-secondary institution for fear of things that have happened. And how do you help someone take that next step?
Great question. Probably some of the leaders on the first early research on academic resiliency, they lumped it into basically four categories, and they called it the 4C. And so the biggest issues that people experience, it has to do with confidence, control, composure, and commitment. And and what you talked about was one of the most important things that someone could do, and that's to develop a social network. It is so much easier to go through that journey of entering a new career, of setting that goal to get a degree, really establish that social network. And a lot of times what that means is it's establishing a different social network. If a lot of the people that I interact with and that are close to me don't value school, and I'm talking about going to school, and they're like, why are you doing that? Why even hassling? Why are you spending the money? You've got to develop a social network that is going to support you in what your goal is. And so it doesn't mean that you have to totally forget about or disband or distance yourself from your friends that maybe have no interest or don't value education, but you've really got to establish a social network. It is so much easier to go through this journey with some support than to do it all by yourself. So that's a huge piece.
Well, I think that's a really important point, Bill. I remember when I was going through my master's program, I really struggled with numbers and figures. And I remember as a graduate student, I had a number of classes where it was really important that I be able to do some pretty sophisticated calculations. And one of the things that I did was connect with some of the other students in my class who had a really strong mathematical background. They were immigrant students from China. And one of the ways that I really was able to be successful was I could be very fluent in my English, my language, and they were really exceptional in their mathematical skills, but not so much with the language because they were from another country. But we worked together collaboratively, and we were able to be entirely successful. It was really just connecting with the people in the class to say, here's the strengths that I bring, and what strengths do you bring? Maybe we can help support each other in our learning. It was very powerful for me, I believe, as a student. So I really
absolutely.
Understand.
Absolutely. And I think a great example of this in the recent past, are you familiar with Jaime Escalante, the math teacher at Garfield High School, and this really low-performing students, and turned them into taking advanced placement math classes and just, even making a movie about, I had an opportunity to meet him, and it was really fascinating. He just, he said this himself. I I don't have the best pedagogy, so I don't know the most about how to set up the perfect lesson, write the perfect lesson plan. If you asked him, was he the best in terms of teaching math? Absolutely. And what was so different about him is what he did is he really instilled in students that, you know what, you can do this. It's a matter of hard work. No one said it's going to be easy. This is going to be hard, but you can do this. You can absolutely make it. And then the other thing is he helped those students to develop a different social network. They still had their friends on the block, but you know what? They also, those students in the class, they bonded together, and so it gave those students an additional social network. And he just talked about how powerful that was. So the social network, getting together with peers, like-minded individuals, people that want to achieve the same goal, degree attainment, absolutely critical.
Well, that's great advice. I'm thinking about the challenge of the school and life responsibilities and how trying to balance all of those time commitments can be a particular challenge. That was one that we identified in some of the challenges that one might face.
Oh, God.
Strategies would you have for someone who was really trying to grapple with those type of challenges?
Okay, great question. And that one, it's so easy, but we don't ever stop and do it. It's the plan. You know what? I'm going back to school, and I've got kids. You know what? Really? If you got kids, they're gonna get sick. You know that, or there's gonna be. So what's your plan A? What's your plan B? It's to have, you know what, it's not a matter of if there's going to be some challenges or obstacles. You know what, it's when. And so it's all about the more prepared I am for those situations, it's all about your ability to take action. So when an obstacle comes up, do you end up feeling paralyzed? Or you still may have that fear, but you've mapped out a plan, and you're able to take action. Taking some kind of action is what helps to alleviate that anxiety, that fear, and so it is about planning. And one of the best things to do. Goals are just so powerful, and especially if they use SMART goal format, because then you start to really think about.
What's a SMART goal?
A SMART goal is it's that your goal is specific. There's definitely not that I want to be this someday. You know what? I'm going to be this, and I'm going to be this by this certain date. It's measurable. That's by putting a date to it. It's attainable and timely. But it's just it's putting. It really helps you to map things out, because it also. All right, so it helps to break things into smaller chunks. That's the real power of any kind of goal setting, is just it seems like it's so far away, and I may not have that long-term perspective. And a lot of struggling students don't. It just, wow, I'm worried about how am I going to make it to the end of the week, end of the month, and we're talking, wow, I've got to endure this and be broke and not have money, and everybody's suffering for 2 years. Without that long-term perspective, it's easy to give up. And having those goals.
So big picture thinking, it sounds like. Not just on the short term, but you've got to have some big picture thoughts about where are you going with all this, and what is your long-term goal.
Well, and that helps to also, I need that sense of hope. I need to know what the heck what am I working for? What is it how, it needs to be relevant to me. instead of just to obtain a degree, that's not enough. It's okay, and how is that going to add value to my life? What other doors is that probably going to open up for me and for my family? That just makes obtaining it that much more real in your mind's eye. So having goals is so much power, adds so much power and increases your odds of success. I think it was from Jack Canfield, actually. I heard this: having a written goal and mapping out even some kind of a plan, your odds of achieving that goal have increased 400%.
Yes, I heard the power of goals. Well, when we come back, Phil, I want to touch on the other two challenges we identified early in the program: accessibility, being able to access classes at times that are convenient for us, and how do you overcome the challenges around that, as well as the cost factor. How do you help manage some of the costs associated with going back to school? And another kind of interesting question that's related to that is what is driving up the cost of education these days? It's making it so expensive and inaccessible for so many adults. But those are many questions that I hope we are able to get back to as soon as we return from this very short break.
Okay.
Life is all about experiences, right? Maybe you just saw the best movie ever. Maybe your St. Bernard decided to share the couch with you. Maybe your team just won the big game on the final play. Although each experience is unique, they all share one thing: you want to talk about them. Well, now is the perfect time to chat with A Kind Voice. The super friendly folks at A Kind Voice want to hear about your experiences, from everyday stuff like books, movies, music, news, sports, and pets, to big ideas and philosophy. Call 800-876-2399 to talk right now. No worries, it's all free. A Kind Voice just wants you to know they're waiting to talk to awesome people like you. 800-876-2399. A Kind Voice is a nonprofit organization powered by volunteers and doesn't provide professional advice. Call them at 800-876-2399 or go to akindvoice.org for more information.
A Kind Voice Radio.
Hi, this is Dr. V. Mayfield with A Kind Voice on Employment, Opportunity, and Innovation. We're talking today with Phil Trejo. He has presented at numerous universities and colleges, as well as the National Urban Education Conference. Particularly, his area of expertise is academic resiliency. We're talking today about how to overcome any challenges that a mature worker might face when considering returning to the educational setting to increase their skills. We've identified some particular challenges that mature workers might have, and Phil is speaking to them. Just before the break, we had talked about overcoming your past experiences, negative thinking, social and life responsibilities, and we're about to embark upon a discussion around accessibility and how do you really navigate some of the challenges around accessing the classes you need when it may conflict with other things going on in your life, and they may not have the classes you need at the time you need them. That's a huge challenge, especially as colleges and universities cut back on classes. What strategies or tips do you have for us on this, Phil?
Wow, that's a tough one, and it's a complicated one, and yet that kind of goes back to what we have talked about before. What is it? Are you clear about what your goal is? Are you taking responsibility for the outcomes? Are you developing a social network? The social network is huge. The biggest thing is to gather as much information as you can and ask as many questions as you can. One of the great things that is happening in post-secondary education is they're finally getting that clue of academic customer service. And so if I'm going to go shop somewhere, there's a lot of different places I can go for that same product. So a lot of it has to do with if that store, that business wants to continue, it's about convenience. And so a lot of colleges, especially your community colleges, big community college advocate, if you can't tell, they are really getting it. Be informed. Gather as much information. Be clear. This is what I'd like to achieve. These are some of the obstacles. Map it out. These are some of the obstacles I may have. This is my schedule. This is how much time I can commit to it, and be willing to shop around. You know what's really great about it now is for a lot of degrees and certificate programs, I don't have to shop just within that 50-mile radius. The game has really changed with the amount of online programs that are out there. It's just really expanded your possibilities, your options. So the realm of possibilities is probably bigger than it's ever been in terms of getting a degree. It's know what those limiting factors might be, what might be some of those obstacles, and just start calling, get information, have somebody work with you, have them prove it to you, have them map it out. When you talk to someone in advising, don't let yourself don't be the victim of like someone when they show up to a car lot. What does it take to have you buy today? You know what? As a student, prospective student, you're in control. And if that's not a good fit for you, and if there's not a decent level of flexibility, and if they can't map it out for you and give you a pretty good idea of this is going to be the availability of these courses, and if it's not going to work for you, then there's usually there's some other options. So it's about just kind of mapping it out and asking questions. Just ask a ton of questions. You spoke to that self-efficacy. Huge. Mm-hmm. That's huge. And too many times, I don't want to ask questions. I don't want to seem dumb. Wow, you know what? Every expert started out a beginner in anything. So, you know what? You're a beginner. Accept it and ask the questions.
Well, that's just awesome advice. I had recently an experience with a nephew of mine who was missing at least one course in foreign language, and he really wanted to be able to graduate in a timely way, not wait until the next year. In order to do that, he worked with the college for them to arrange for him to go out of state and get the same credit for this class at another institution within the time frame he needed. So I really believe in your ability to be able to talk with your advisor very frankly about what it is that you need and how they can make it happen. And I love that thing about you being in control. The students as being in control, especially with all of the options, that's a really powerful way to frame this whole adventure.
It is. We do have a lot more options. There's and there's plus and negatives to that, because especially a non-traditional student, does that online environment, does that match my learning style and my learning strengths? And again, just the more information that you have, the more you can find a path to get to it, to get to what your goal is. There, you can have it, you can achieve it. It's about asking the right questions, and just keep asking.
Yeah, let's look at the cost a moment though, because I think that's a huge one for most individuals. navigating this whole idea of tuition, out-of-state tuition, in-state tuition, loans, grants. So how do you begin to overcome many of the challenges around cost when you're considering returning to school?
What I would do, or the advice that I would give a friend that was talking about, you know what, I think it's time for a change. I want to go back to school. You know what, I would say, what is it that you're passionate about? What are you interested in? And then I want you to talk to the advisor and ask questions about gainful employment information. I know that's a big thing. I don't know if that's nationally, but I know at the community college level, most of them have to put that on their website. And so what that means is, here's this field that I'm pursuing, interior decorating, let's say. Well, it gives you the data on what's the likelihood or what percentage of people that complete this degree program actually end up being employed in that field. So that is a great thing to do off the bat. Get that information. Is what you're interested in, is it something that's really going to be marketable? Are there those opportunities?
Well, where do I get that information?
It has to be posted on people's websites. So usually if you put in a search on someone's website, gainful employment information, they need to list that. If not, you need to ask those questions, again, when you go into, when you're talking to an advisor. So that would be a huge thing. The next thing is, oh, my God, they want you to be there. So they will try to move mountains to help clear obstacles out of your way to completing your FAFSA. What are some of those hoops that you're going to need to jump through to be able to find out if you qualify for financial aid?
For a moment, because you use an acronym here, so I'm going to stop you for a moment. Help our listeners understand what the FAFSA. What's that?
Oh, my gosh. Bernita, you're going to have to help me with that. The FAFSA, I've been out of it for a couple years now of higher ed. It's the federal.
Yes. Well, it's an acronym for the federal application for financial services and of that sort. And so, if you want to apply for a loan or a grant, you have to complete one of those. They won't even pay any attention to anything you say until you've completed that first.
I know, and that's one of those hoops that you until you start that process, nothing else will happen until you've completed that. And so that's just some of that information that you'll get when you're asking those questions. Go call them, make appointments, get that information, and there are so many people that are willing to help you figure out a way to fund your education.
So that website, by the way, is FAFSA, or I should say FAFSA. That's Frank Adam Frank Sam Adam .ed.gov. And it's a government website in which you have to file for any type of assistance with federal student aid, and it's an application that must be done online. So it is important that be completed if you intend to get public funds to help support your education.
Yeah, if you wanted financial aid, absolutely. And sorry I bombed on that one.
No, that's quite all right.
But you know what? They will access to post-secondary education is so much more available than it's ever been. And so access isn't the biggest obstacle right now. It's success, because there's so many people that are able to access it. But what's more important is that they're able to have success while they're there.
Well, Phil, can you speak to this notion of why the cost of education seems to be continuing to increase. I think that it is providing a barrier for some individuals who might really be considering returning back to school to increase their skills, but that enormous cost and increasing year after year. Why is this happening, and is there anything that we can do about it?
Well, this is just it's an amateur perspective on what the problem is, but those institutions are not getting the same amount of funds. People are being frugal with their money, and hard to believe, but the government is asking more questions, or states are asking more questions about the money that they provide to these universities and community colleges, not necessarily giving them blank checks. There's a higher level of accountability, and so they're not getting the same level of funding that they experienced before. Also, a lot of these institutions are getting caught up in what they call performance-based funding, and so now places are state of Colorado is changing how these institutions are funded. So now it's not just based on meat in the seat. It is based, part of your funding is based on, and how many of those students ended up being successful, how many of them attained degrees, how many of them attained certificates. So there's also the student loan default rate. So there's several contributing factors, and the thing is, and it's still such a worthwhile investment because there is so much research out there, statistics that say how much more money I have the potential of earning in my lifetime based on compared to I don't have a degree compared to if I have a degree. So it's all about an investment. I still think it's a very wise investment. And the thing is to go about it informed and intelligently. What is it that you want to do? Have you done the research? Is it a field that seems like it's going to have a high level of employability in the area that I'm at? Am I willing to move to other areas? So all of those questions I can't answer for someone, but if they have those, they'll get the answers.
Well, I think those are excellent responses because it is a very complex issue. I recall that when I first thought about going to community college during my freshman year, community college was free in California. I think I paid maybe $50 maximum to take a course. I think that was I had some fee associated with that particular class. But for the longest, the community college did not carry with it an expense, and that has really grown tremendously over the years. I want to say how many years ago that is. I don't want to date myself.
Yeah, I resemble that.
But there was a time when college was seemingly affordable for most people, and I think a lot of that is due to, one, universities spending a lot more money to attract students these days. The state-of-the-art facilities, they're very appealing to students, but I think that they come with a costly bill. Also, contracts for some of these administrators and faculty members are passed on to the students, and sometimes supporting some of the very best professors.
No, you bring it great points, and there's probably going to be an interesting trend that we're going to see. A lot of these campuses, these institutions, they had that mindset that we're successful as an institution as long as we keep adding more buildings. So as long as they built more buildings and they expanded, and now we're adding dorms, and so that there was that notion of always bigger is better. And now what's probably going to happen is with so many of the online course offerings, you're going to find that so many more of your campuses, they're not going to be expanding in the traditional sense. It's not going to be about another building going up. It's providing that infrastructure to be able to provide more service and meet the needs of more students, which may not necessarily mean you need another building. Especially when we're talking online degree courses.
Well, we're at exciting times, and you certainly have been very helpful in helping us think about moving on into the educational arena to be able to take additional courses and upgrade our skills. This has been so exciting to have you lend your voice to this conversation, Phil. Can you tell our listeners for a moment how they might be able to get in contact with you should they have any further questions related to academic resiliency or moving forward as a mature student?
Absolutely. I've got a ton of resources that I can give to somebody. Probably the best way to get a hold of me is through email, and that would be educational.cqi@gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Phil, for joining us so much. Next week, our guest will be an individual, Denise Ceretta. She is from an organization called One World, Everybody Eats. And she has been able to be successful with starting community cafes in which you can come and eat fully for whatever price you can pay. Pay what you can restaurant. So we're going to be talking again along our series of Game Changers with Denise Ceretta of One World, Everybody Eats. So we hope that you will join us again next Tuesday. That will be November 26th, same time, same channel, at A Kind Voice on Employment, Innovation, and Opportunity. This is Dr. V. Mayfield signing off. Please go to Facebook, and you can connect with me on Facebook. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn under Dr. V. M. Mayfield, and you'll find me on Twitter, also V. M. Mayfield. Look forward to talking with you all soon. Take care. God bless.
Things are crazy in these troubled days. Sometimes it seems the only place to turn is away. But in that moment you can throw away the fear, 'cause someone else can be just what you need to hear. With a kind voice, a few kind words, an open ear for when you need to be heard, a warm heart. You can make that choice to find a kind voice. Yes, we're different, look at you and me. Both have questions, both have answers, both have needs. And though most likely we will often disagree, we can just keep talking, maybe find that we can be a kind voice, a few kind words, an open ear for when you need to be heard, a warm heart. We can make that choice to be a kind voice. Nothing wrong with reaching out when you need. I'll be there for you, and maybe you can be for me.
a kind voice, a few kind words, an open ear for when you need to be heard, a warm heart. We can make that choice to be a kind voice, a few kind words,